Let's see what else we got going on. Oh man, we are. I haven't got to talk about any combat sports on the podcast yet, but man, we are on the eve of probably the biggest UFC fight in history. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor, which is going to be a phenomenal fight. I really wasn't sure how it was going to go. I was really nervous. If you watch the first press conference they did in New York, they didn't allow it to be open to the public, right? It was just press. So there was no applause, there was no reaction, it was nothing. It was just the guys on stage with Dana White and talking. And I really I got a little nervous because Conor just was promoting his whiskey the entire time, and he was like drinking whiskey on the stage and like giving whiskey to Dana, and he was acting, it just didn't seem right, it seemed forced. And I think now in hindsight, looking back at it, it's probably he didn't have the crowd to feed off of, and Conor's such a boisterous guy, and he really relies on the mental aspect of the game, like getting in your head and being loud and being obnoxious, being a trash talker. So I think not having the crowd to feed off of just didn't make him look very good, because Khabib is such a calm. He barely fucking speaks English. He's from Dagestan. He's Russian. Russian is obviously his first language, so he barely speaks English. So he's not incredibly articulate. And anyway, Conor's interrupting him like the entire time, so it's hard for him to get any complete thoughts out. But they've done several interviews with Conor since then that I've watched, and man, he looks like vintage Conor McGregor. I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous, man. I thought maybe the money spoiled him, maybe he's worried about making money off that whiskey, maybe he's just not in the game, maybe his head's not in the game. But boy, man, seeing him in some interviews, he's wearing his grandfather's, like, it's like a derby looking hat, and at first I was like, oh, but man, his mindset, you can tell. He's calm and cool and collected. He's in there to fight. The thing that I realized is that he doesn't need money. Like if it was about money, he'd be fine. Like, he's got investments and he could do movies. He could do anything and he could be set for life. He's going to be fine forever. Conor McGregor is probably the biggest MMA fighter ever. Like, if you take out Brock Lesnar, because he draws that entire WWE audience and then the MMA audience as well, Conor McGregor is definitely the biggest fighter in mixed martial arts history of any organization. He's huge. Everybody knows him all around the world. Everybody knows who Conor McGregor is. You probably go over to Ethiopia, some dudes running, playing soccer ball with the ball made out of twigs and shit, and they know who Conor McGregor is. They know who notorious Conor McGregor is. But man, seeing him in the interviews, I watched an interview. They had some more press today, some big and it was actually the first press they did to an audience. And man, he just looked relaxed. He was speaking really intelligently. The one thing I like, man, Conor has started talking about the weight divisions. A big thing in MMA, if you're not aware, and if you don't care about MMA, you're probably not going to listen to this part anyway. But in MMA, in the UFC, there's actually a big problem with weight classes. If you don't know, in wrestling and combat sports, boxing, all that, there's a big portion of it is weight cutting. So you have to make weight. There's weight divisions. And something these guys do, and it's a classic thing for wrestling and mixed martial arts and boxing, is a guy might be fighting at 155 pounds, but this guy might walk around at like 200 pounds normally, like a 6-foot guy, 200 pounds, and in his camp, he's got to cut weight down to like 180, and then right before the fight, in the days coming to the fight, they just like spend a lot of time in the sauna, they spend a lot of time on the treadmill, they'll do pad work, and they're wearing full sweats and windbreakers, and they'll wear like a trash bag against their body under their clothes. There's people that wear, like, they'll get these suits and they'll cut weight with these suits that make them sweat. They'll do stuff with a bath, like they'll get in a hot bath, and man, it's really dangerous. Some guys have been close to death. I'm sure there are people that have died from trying to cut weight. It's inevitable, but Khabib in particular, he's had a huge problem trying to make weight in his past, and I think he's solved that problem now because he's seeked out a dietary helper, like a specialist that helps him keep his weight down and then cut from there. So he's a guy that would walk around normally like 205, and he's cutting down to 155. He's the 155-pound champion. So I know he was walking around at 174, which is way better for him than normal. So I think he's going to come into the fight in good shape. But Conor, man, he's in this interview today, he was really spearheading talking about creating more weight divisions. And I think, so this is UFC 229. We're going to see this Saturday. I'm recording this on October 4th, so if I don't release it before the fight, this is all pre-fight stuff. But Conor was talking about in the press for a good portion of his interview, was talking about let's create some more weight divisions. You know, something that's a big problem in the UFC right now is they had a big changeover in ownership. There was this guy, Lorenzo, who was a genius fight maker. Lorenzo Fertitta, I think is his last name, but he is a genius when it comes to making fights, and him and Dana White were kind of co-owners of the UFC, and him and Dana both sold their portions, but Dana remained on in the UFC, and Lorenzo got out. He's out of the business. So Dana's still in there. He's still making fights. He still plays the same role he played before, plus Lorenzo's role, pretty much. And honestly, he's not doing a great job. Something that you're seeing in these cards is they're stripping champions all the time. They're creating, if you don't know what an interim belt is in combat sports, in boxing, MMA, whatever, an interim championship is, let's say, in the lightweight division. I might have said Khabib was a light heavyweight earlier. I meant to say lightweight if I did say that. But in the lightweight division, right, you're 155 pounds. Let's say you have a champion, and for some reason the champion gets injured and he can't compete or something like that. You want title fights to mainline cards, right? Because title fights equal more pay-per-views. Like, if you see a belt on the line, you're exponentially going to get more pay-per-view buys. So with the UFC right now, they've been creating interim belts and real belts, and there's just belts all over the place. Like, I know one in particular, Tyron Woodley. He's the welterweight champion in the UFC, and he had a shoulder injury, and he was out for like a year plus of time, and he couldn't fight. He had a shoulder injury. So they had an interim title fight between Rafael dos Anjos and Colby Covington. And Colby Covington won. He won the fight, and he took some pretty real nose damage, and he already had damage to his nasal passage, and he was having trouble breathing, which really, really affects your cardio. And because you're supposed to breathe through your nose. If you don't know that, if you breathe through your mouth, you're going to get gassed a lot easier. It's better for your body, like better for your lungs if you're breathing through your nose, if you have that ability. So these guys getting smashed in the nose all the time, it obstructs their nasal passage because it's crushed. And so Colby just needed to get some nasal surgery. And I mean, it was a week after his fight, and Tyron comes off injury all of a sudden right after Colby's fight. And so Dana White, he needs a main event. I think it was 228 or 227 was the Tyron Woodley fight. And he needed a title fight to sell this card. Like, he wasn't going to be able to put a belt on the card. There wasn't going to be one. So what he does is, instead of, waiting for Colby Covington to heal and give him the fight, 5 weeks later or 8 weeks later, whatever it is, to heal up and get a good camp in, because a good camp is typically 7 weeks, something like that, because you don't want to overtrain. You kind of judge it per fighter, but you'll do like 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 week camp. Some guys go even shorter. Some guys will take real short notice fights. They'll make fights on 3 weeks notice. I know the last time Khabib fought, when he fought for the 155-pound belt, he fought, he was scheduled to fight Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson destroys his ACL doing press in a freak accident, tripping over cables, and then they pull in Max Holloway, who's the 145-pound champion, to fight him. Max Holloway, who was the 145-pound champion, stepping up to fight the 155-pound champion. He can't make weight. He medically gets pulled from the fight because he can't make weight at 155, and on like 2 days' notice, this fighter, Al Iaquinta, steps in to fight Khabib. So, they're just throwing Hail Marys and audibles all over the UFC game right now. But getting back to the Colby thing, they wanted to make a fight between somebody to fight Tyron Woodley, and Colby couldn't do it, and obviously it's the interim champion. The interim champion has to fight the real champion to settle the belt, to see who's the real champ, So Colby couldn't fight, obviously, and so what do? They strip Colby of the belt he just won that they just offered him. Like, he was going to fight Rafael dos Anjos anyway. Rafael dos Anjos is actually how you pronounce it. They do them R's as H's in Brazil. But yeah, Rafael dos Anjos, Colby goes in there, mauls him. Everybody thinks Colby's going to get smashed. He goes in there and kicks ass, and he just needs a little time to heal up. And they don't give him the opportunity to defend his belt. They strip him immediately. And what do? They give the fight for Tyron Woodley to Darren Till. Darren Till, an amazing fighter, but he missed weight in his fight with, I think it was, who did he fight? Luke Rockhold. I can't remember who Darren Till fought right before he fought before he fought Tyron. But he missed weight. I think he won the fight, but he missed weight. And he immediately gets a title shot right after, and Tyron stomped his ass. He knocked him out in the second round. But it's just weird how Dana White is not great with the perception. Like, it doesn't look good to the public right now, what they're doing with the belts. And getting back to the Conor thing, it only really what he was talking about, it only makes sense if they want title fights all the time. They want titles to be able to sell cards. Make more weight divisions, because the weight cuts are so dangerous. It's so unhealthy for your athletes. And more titles is more titles. That's more opportunity to sell something. So right now, the divisions in the UFC, they have a 125, 135, 145, 155. Then from 155, it goes up to 170. It goes from 155 to 170, from 170 to 185, 185 to 205, and 205 to heavyweight max is 265. So you can any weight under 265 and above 205 is heavyweight. Like, you typically don't want to go in there under 245 if you're going to be a heavyweight. But, I mean, if you just think about, like, if you get in the middle of those divisions, you look at 155 to 170, that's 15 pounds. 170 to 185, that's 15 pounds. 185 to 205, that's another 20 pounds. Like, Jesus Christ, there's a huge separation in athleticism. So in the height difference between guys at 155 to 205 is really not that different. Like, you might get some guys fighting at 205 that are like 6'4", but a lot of those guys are going to be heavyweights. I mean, you'll have a guy at 155 that's 5'9", or you can have a guy that's 6'1". And I mean, that's every one of those weight divisions pretty much from 155 to 205. And if you just think about the body types and the musculature, the strength of those fighters, like, if you can cut from 200 pounds down to 155, you're a massive human being. And the other thing that you don't know is, if you don't know about combat sports, you weigh in for the fight the day before. So you actually have an entire day to drink a shit ton of water and rehydrate and eat food, and you can put on like 15 pounds. So like, if you're fighting at 155 and you weigh in at 155, you can really walk into the cage at like 175 and fight whoever you're fighting at a much larger weight. So if you're a big guy and you can cut the weight and come down to make the weight, you actually have a huge advantage, and all kinds of guys are doing that. So if you think like, if you're thinking about maybe what you weigh, like, I know I weigh, like, I'm walking around right now about 170. Between 170 and 175 is like my natural weight, right? So if I fought some of those dudes that were at 170, like, those dudes are giant. Those dudes are huge. I could never have any hopes of competing with people in that division, like, if that was going to be my natural weight class. And there's no incentive for these guys to fight in their natural weight classes, because they'll get stomped by some dude that's bigger than them, and that's how the game is run. So what's really cool for me is that Conor is the most affecting person, the most affecting singularity in the UFC, in MMA, for sure. And if he's talking about more weight divisions, like a 155, 165, 175, 185, 195, 205, like a belt for every 10 pounds. Boxing has a belt for like every 3.5 pounds. They have like cruiserweight, junior cruiserweight, super cruiserweight. Like, they have so many weight divisions in boxing. So if Conor's talking about it, I bet it happens, There's rumor that the main event, they have yet to announce the main event for UFC 230 at Madison Square Garden, but it is rumored that Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier are going to fight for the first 165-pound belt, which will be a great fight. Nate Diaz, obviously a championship caliber fighter. Dustin Poirier, he's really poised to be the 155 contender, but the weight division at 155 it's such a traffic jam at 155 right now. I mean, not only do you have the legit 155ers, but you also pretty much have everybody at the top of the heap in 145 that is probably going to have to move up as they get a little older just because the weight cuts are so harsh. But you have Conor, Khabib, you have Tony Ferguson, you got Dustin Poirier, you got Nate Diaz that can make that weight. You've got, just so many fighters. You got Brian Ortega, who is the number one contender for the 145-pound belt. You got Max Holloway, who is the title holder at 145. I mean, you just have so many guys just stacked up. You got Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee, a phenomenal wrestler, getting better at striking all the time. He's only 25 years old. I mean, Kevin Lee is going to be a world champion. You just have such a traffic jam at 155 that it only really makes sense to add that 165, add that 175 instead of, move welterweight up to 175 instead of 170 so they can fight a little heavier. It's easier for them to make weight. And then you leave your middleweight at 185. You create a new weight division at 195, and you keep your light heavyweight at 205. So it really only makes sense. The only thing that it will fuck with is the culture shock for the basic UFC fan, because and you might have your opinions about mixed martial arts, but it really is it's a beautiful sport. It's these two human beings. They train their ass off stylistically. They prepare in their gym. They have a team, and they go in there and they just pretty much empty out their toolkit to see who's the better man. When you get two guys that are at a really high level, it is a really interesting thing to watch because they spend time gauging each other's distance and sizing each other up, seeing what the other person's going to do. So both guys are kind of like magicians that aren't showing you their cards straight up, So they're both trying to pull these tricks out of the bag that neither one knows is coming yet, and then a different fighter will prepare better than the other one. So it's just I love watching fights. I love UFC. I love MMA in general. It's a beautiful thing to watch. But the normal UFC fan, a lot of people just like to see two dudes beating the shit out of each other, and a lot of people, that's the perception of the sport. For many, many people, it's just that it's like a stupid, non-artistic. Like, I remember Meryl Streep said that they don't want the only arts to be mixed martial arts, or mixed martial arts aren't arts or whatever. But martial arts. A martial art is an art, when you talk about karate, nobody really does karate in the UFC, but you got Muay Thai, a beautiful striking sport, incredibly technical, kickboxing, boxing, you got jiu-jitsu, which is an incredible, if you watch, there was the Max Holloway Brian Ortega fight, which was set for one of the earlier UFC fights this year that fell through because Max tried to cut that weight and fight Khabib and got pulled medically. And then when he went through his camp, he got a concussion, and he didn't take inventory of it. And he actually got called out on television by former fighter Michael Bisping, former middleweight champion. He was telling him, he's got a British accent. I won't do it justice, but I won't try. But he was telling him, you seem like you just rolled out of bed. You seem tired. Are you okay? Because he was kind of slurring his speech, and he knew Max, and Max was kind of acting strange. And after that, they did a little investigation. They found out he had concussion symptoms because he was trying to go through and do his weight cut, and his body just started fucking him over again. So, for him in particular, I don't know how much he can do that 145 thing, like how much longer. But Brian Ortega, in that, they do a UFC countdown for all their main events. It's like a video thing they'll put out. It's like an episode they'll do on TV. And there's a section of that UFC countdown for Max Holloway and Brian Ortega where T-City, Brian Ortega, is rolling. That's what they call it in jiu-jitsu, rolling. He's rolling with Rener Gracie. The Gracies are the pioneers of jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the world. And they're all over the place, Gracie academies. But Rener is one of the best. And there's just this slow-motion video of just Brian and Rener rolling, going through pins and going through positions in jiu-jitsu. And it is like it's like watching two dudes breakdancing with each other. I mean, it's incredible to watch, like the movement and just the obviously all the time spent thinking about just the spacing and the moves. It's kind of incredible to watch. So I would recommend, if you've never seen anybody do jiu-jitsu, there's that UFC Countdown, Max Holloway, Brian Ortega. Look that up and watch it. It's really cool. But man, I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. Oh yeah, martial arts. It's man, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, let me tell you. R.I.P. Mac Miller. That's really random. That's in his Tiny Desk concert, there's a Portuguese talking. Whatever. Scratch that. But yeah, man, mixed martial arts, I love watching it. If you shortchange it and think it's just two dudes going in there and beating each other like thugs or something, I mean, it's really a lot more than that. They're smart people most of the time. And they go in there and work their ass off. It's a hard career. It's a hard way to go. And I respect, I'm trying to do yoga and I'm trying to run. Anybody that puts themselves through the fire like that, and it's not easy to be. I'm watching people that are trying to be world champions. I mean, I watch all kinds of fights, but the best is the best. And watching the best is so fun, One of the best right now is TJ Dillashaw. TJ Dillashaw, he is the 135-pound champion right now, and his next fight is against Dominic Cruz for the 135-pound belt. He's going to defend, and I think his next fight after that, he's going to step down to 125 and fight the 125-pound champ Henry Cejudo, who is an Olympic gold medalist. I think it's in boxing he's an Olympic gold medalist. No, I don't think it's wrestling. But he's an Olympic gold medalist in boxing, and he just beat DJ Demetrius Johnson, Mighty Mouse, who is the most prolific UFC champion in history. I think he has 11 title defenses on his record. So he won the title in the first fight, and then he defended it 11 times after. So he won 12 title fights consecutively. And I think that was over a period greater than 6 years. So Henry Cejudo just came in, and man, he fought a tough contest in a 5-round decision, and he beat the guy that people think is the best. I mean, there's not a whole lot of stiff competition at 125, which you could imagine, but man, DJ just was stomping everybody, and nobody thought he would ever lose, for sure. Like, if you were going to bet on a fight, that was one to bet on for sure. Henry Cejudo, and win some money, because nobody thought he was going to win. And man, he just came out and he had a great game plan, and he worked his ass off, and he won the fight, and he won the belt. So, if TJ steps through Dominic Cruz, which he may, Dominic Cruz is coming off a huge layoff of injury. Like, it might be a 2-year layoff in injury that he's had, and before that he was out for like 2 years. So man, he's been on the shelf for a while. Dominic Cruz is one of the best ever. His movement in the cage is something Dominic Cruz's movement is so crazy. Like, you could just black out a silhouette of somebody that moves like him when he's fighting, and you would know for sure it's Dominic Cruz, because his style is so unique. It's really hard to deal with. But man, TJ is such a good fighter, and he's also, Conor rises to the occasion and he does really well, but TJ might be the ultimate rise to the occasion guy in MMA right now, and maybe for a long time, maybe in history, because he thrives in contest. He's the best version of himself when the lights are on and he's the main event, he's fighting for the title. He loves it. You can tell by watching him. You can tell by the look on his face. He's an incredible champion. He's a real champ. When I think about greatness, and we'll think whatever you want about this, but when I think about greatness and stuff, I think about TJ Dillashaw all the time, because the dude busts his ass, works harder than anybody can work, and then he thrives off the moment. A lot of people, myself included, they have a lot of grandeur, these, I wouldn't say delusions of grandeur, but they have all these thoughts of I'm going to be great, I'm going to do this, whatever. And then when you get there, maybe you weren't prepared enough. You were caught off guard by the moment. You weren't ready to be there, really. And really what it takes for the normal person is a series of moments to learn what it's like to be there in the moment, and then you get comfortable there, and then you can thrive there. But TJ seems like he's always been the guy that he thrives in the moment, and he loves the contest. And if you're not a competitive person, like if you never competed in any kind of sport, like, I mean, I know comparing martial arts to this, but I did a whole lot of like marching band stuff, like a lot of marching arts in my life, if you want to call them the mixed marching arts. But I did a lot of that. And what you learn through doing any activity like that is you start to put into perspective how many contests you really get. Like, say it's basketball, boxing, MMA, marching band. Like in marching band in particular, you only perform your show at contest like 6 times, you know? But you work every day for 3.5 hours or more. In the summer, you're doing 12-hour days for 3 weeks. And you only get to perform your show for judges like 6 to 8 times, if you're lucky. You know, so if you think about MMA, your whole career, all your fights, like if you're lucky and you're a great fighter, like maybe you'll end your career with 25 fights, you know? Which is, I mean, it's a great amount of contests. And in basketball, you know, if you're in the NBA, you play a ton of games. In baseball, you play a ton of games. But in the MMA world, you don't get a lot of runs at it, you know? I mean, you really got to, and if you want to get a lot of runs at it, you got to win, you know? Because if you're not winning, you're getting beat up and you're getting concussed and your health is declining. So if you want to get a lot of fights, you got to do well. You have to be able to have a little self-preservation and keep yourself going. So knowing that, like, you only get a certain amount of times to be in the moment, and you spend so much time and effort trying to get there and the anticipation building up to it, that for a person to really go off and shine and be their best, and to think about that, like, it's probably the easiest to be your best in practice because you're comfortable there, you have your trainers there, you're in your gym, like, you can be your best in practice. But when TJ Dillashaw steps in the cage, he is the best version of himself that he can be. And every fight, he's better than the last, which means every fight from here on out in the future. Let's not talk about the future, but in the past, if you timeline his fights from the beginning of his pro fight career, every fight has been better than the last, and he's been the best version of himself in every fight going up that ladder, and which is an incredible feat, you know? So you got to give it up to that guy. Shouts out to TJ Dillashaw. Love, I don't know him or anything, but I am a huge admirer of what he does in the cage, what he does with his career. He's a badass, man, that's for sure. Some more MMA stuff, man. John Jones. If any of you guys know who John Bones Jones is, John Jones, probably the greatest fighter in UFC history. We talked a lot about Conor the greatest figure or something, but you want to talk about fighters, like dudes that kick ass, John Jones is the man. John Jones, there's not a lot of undefeated champions, you know, and John Jones isn't undefeated because he is undefeated, but he's not undefeated. And I remember when I was in high school, the first fight I think I saw John Jones fight was against a guy named Matt the Hammer Hamill. And Matt Hamill is a deaf gentleman. I think that's the nicest way to say it. He's deaf and he's an MMA fighter, a crazy good wrestler. He's a good striker. But John Jones stomped his ass out, and it appeared that he stopped him with elbows, right? And he busted him up, dude. I mean, he knocked him out pretty much, and he was bleeding out of his head, and like the blood was pooling up in his eyes as he laid on the canvas. I mean, it was scary to see, right? And they stopped the fight, and then they come out, the ref comes out, Bruce Buffer comes out, and they announce that it is a victory for Matt Hamill by disqualification for 12-6 elbows. If you're not familiar with 12-6 elbows, in MMA, elbows are legal, but you cannot come from straight up above your head to straight down on a person's face when they're on the ground. That's called a 12-6 elbow. And it's just like, I don't think it's a legitimate move, and it shouldn't be illegal. And there's a lot of debate on whether it should be illegal, should not be illegal. And also, they weren't exactly 12-6 elbows. Also, he was beating the fucking shit out of the guy. The reason he won was not because of the 12-6 elbows. So he got disqualified. That's his only official loss on record. Now, he does have 2 no contests to Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier, who is right now the light heavyweight title holder as well as the heavyweight title holder, is the second ever 2 UFC weight class champion. He's holding 2 belts consecutively right now. The interesting thing is John Jones has beat him twice, and both times John Jones tested hot for banned substances. The first time they were able to source it out to, it's really funny. There's an interview on Joe Rogan. John Jones was talking about a friend of his offered him an off-brand Cialis, and it was tainted with a supplement that is banned by USADA. USADA is the organization that drug tests for the UFC. So what these fighters are required to do is insane. They have to have samples of every supplement they take. They have to make sure that nobody's putting stuff in their water, nobody's putting stuff in their food, to make them test hot so that they can't fight, or so that, it'll be wiped from the record if the other guy loses. Like, who knows the conspiracy stuff, like if people are spiking stuff to get people to test hot. But unfortunately, John Jones took some bad dick pills, and he tested hot for a controlled substance, a banned substance in the UFC. And so the first fight where he beats Daniel Cormier by decision, I believe, is scrapped from the record. No contest for both of them. So it's not a loss for Daniel. It's not a loss for John. It's just a no contest. And then the second fight, John Jones knocked him out with a head kick. He told him in press, he was like, I'm going to catch you with a head kick and knock you out. Knock you the fuck out, dude. And he did. And he caught him, and he knocked him out, and then he chased him down and TKO'd him, beat the shit out of him, and he won his title. So what the chronological thing, how it happens, John beats DC. He gets stripped of his belt for testing hot, and then when he gets cleared and they realized it wasn't that he was taking steroids, they set a new fight, and they fight for the vacant belt. And no, I don't think they fight for a vacant belt. Somehow DC, I think Daniel Cormier fought Alexander Gustafsson for the vacated belt. He wins against Gustafsson in a decision, and he's the new title holder. John Jones comes off the bench, and he goes in, fights DC, beats him, knocks him out, and then again, he tests hot for the drug test right before the fight. So if you're not aware, USADA will test these athletes all the time. So they test John all the time. He tests clean all the time. And then the drug test he took literally before the fight, he failed that one for an incredibly small amount of a banned substance. And then the drug test he took after the fight, he passed that drug test. So he didn't test hot for that one. So again, people think that maybe somebody just put something in his water, somebody did something to try to fuck him over. What USADA determined is that his amount of steroids he took would have given him no effect. There's no reason that he would have taken that amount. It must have been something that they can't trace. But they test, like I was getting into earlier, these athletes have to, you can imagine they might be taking any kind of vitamins, just general vitamins that like a male vitamin, something that anybody would take. And then they're taking all kinds of stuff, like anything that'll give them an edge, something that might help them sleep better, get a little more rest, something to help them put on a little more muscle mass. Anything that's legal, these guys will do to try to get an edge. I mean, it's just natural. That's what you would do. And so they have to keep everything they take. They have to report everything they take to USADA, every single thing. And then they have to give them samples in the event that something goes wrong. So John got totally screwed. Again, he beats DC, gets stripped of his belt, but he doesn't get stripped because DC, he doesn't just get stripped because DC was the champion. So the belt goes back to DC. Another no contest. DC's now the title holder. He steps up to heavyweight after that fights Stipe Miocic, knocks Stipe Miocic out in the first round, becomes the heavyweight champion. And now here's John Jones. They figure out that they give him off his 15-month suspension, and they put him back in, and he's not going to get to redeem himself against Daniel Cormier because Cormier is about 40 years old now, and he's, I don't think he can beat John Jones. I don't think he thinks he can beat John Jones because he hasn't. And so it's kind of shitty for John. He's going to get no redemption to beat Cormier and have it on his record that he beat Daniel Cormier. And Cormier also is out here living his best life, doing John Jones' dream. So John's thing was to be an undefeated title holder. He's the youngest champion in UFC history, John Jones. I think he was 26 years old when he won the belt. And John wanted to be undefeated at light heavyweight and then step up to heavyweight, win the belt there, be a 2 title holder, be undefeated for his career. So, I mean, technically he's undefeated, but he does have 1 loss by DQ and 2 no contests. But John Jones is cleared. After 15 months of a suspension, John Jones is coming back to the UFC. They have yet to announce a title fight for him. He's originally from New York, so it makes sense to put him on the MSG card, Madison Square Garden at 230. UFC 230, but I don't think they're going to do it. I think they actually came out in the press and they said they're not going to. Going back to Dustin Poirier and Nate Diaz, they're not announced as the main. They're kind of promoting them as the main event for the card right now, but they're holding out. Like on the website, they're showing that they're going to have a different person, a different fight for the main event, which is a mystery right now. So we'll see after Conor and Khabib who they announce for 230, but nonetheless, John Jones is coming back. And who's he going to fight? You know, who's up on John Jones's radar? Because light heavyweight, I mean, there's it's not a traffic jam. It's the opposite of a traffic jam. It's just kind of like a road closure. Because Cormier has stepped up to heavyweight, and he's won the belt, and his next fight is against Brock Lesnar. It's already confirmed. He's going to fight Brock Lesnar for the heavyweight title. Which he already has. Brock Lesnar is going to challenge him. And then he said publicly, after that, he's going to retire. He's going to ride off into the sunset with his 2 belts, drop the 2 belts, and have an amazing career. Daniel Cormier is undefeated at heavyweight. He fought at heavyweight for a long time. That's actually when he entered mixed martial arts. I think he fought in the Pride tournament. Pride used to have these tournaments. There's another organization like the UFC, and he stepped into that last notice as a replacement, and then just ran through the whole deal and then won the Pride heavyweight title. And he's been undefeated at heavyweight his entire career. He stepped down to light heavyweight to get that title and to try to fight John, and we see how that worked out for him. Also, I don't know if you can tell, I don't like Daniel Cormier very much. He tries to be a trash talker, but he just sounds like a little bitch. That's what I think. I don't like what he says about John Jones is the fucking man. John Jones is probably the best ever. And Daniel tries to act like he's better than that. But boy, you got decisioned once, and then you got beat by a decision, and you got knocked the fuck out, and you're still talking trash like you're better than somebody. But you're not. So that's my opinion on Daniel Cormier. I would like to see John Jones get that fight again, come out, beat him a 3rd time. Daniel Cormier, I'm sure he's the nicest guy in the world. I actually don't have any animosity. I don't know him at all. But I would love to see John Jones come back and fight Cormier, but it's not going to happen. If Cormier somehow loses to Brock Lesnar, I mean, Brock's getting up there in age too, dude. He's not very young. There's no way he's going to beat Daniel Cormier. I really don't think it'll happen. But it would be crazy to see John Jones fight Brock Lesnar. But nonetheless, dude, I mean, what are the fight possibilities for John Jones? Light heavyweight is he's not going to not fight for a title. He's not going to come in and not fight for a belt. What the UFC wants right now is they know Cormier is not going to defend, so they want him to drop the belt. They want him to strip himself of the light heavyweight title. And then John will fight probably Alexander Gustafsson, who, man, John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson went through a 5-round war. If you've never seen that fight, look it up online and watch it. It is an unbelievable fight. Gustafsson is a baller. He fought Daniel Cormier to a decision as well for the title. He fought John to decision for the title. He lost both those contests, but dude, it is some of the most admirable fighting I've ever seen from a fighter, dude. Alexander Gustafsson is a G, for real. He's this Scandinavian bow hunter and shit. The dude's out there hunting deer in the Scandinavian cold forest and shit. The dude's a boss. So I'd love to see John Jones Gustafsson 2. Would be a great fight. Another one in the rumor mill coming up is John Jones versus Cain Velasquez. Or Velasquez. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce the Spanish name. But Cain Velasquez, he is maybe the best UFC heavyweight in history. So John Jones would have to step up to heavyweight to fight him. And that would not be for a belt, but it would be a huge fight. So seeing Cain come... What's interesting about that is Cain is Daniel Cormier's training partner. They're homies. I think they train out of Alpha Male. I may be wrong about that. But they go to war with each other in wrestling. They're both great wrestlers. They're both great strikers, Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez. And man, they're bros. They're bros to the point where Cormier dropped down to, I'm just remembering that now. Cormier dropped down to light heavyweight to avoid having to fight Kane because they're friends and they didn't want to fight, and they train together, they train each other, they go hard in sparring. It's a huge part of their camp is being able to rely on each other. And if they're going to fight each other, they can't train against each other because, I mean, they'll know everything the other one's going to do. So to get out of Kane's way and let Kane go for a title picture, Daniel dropped down a weight division and went for the title at light heavyweight. And Kane was the heavyweight champion. He might be the greatest heavyweight in UFC history. On paper, it's Stipe Miocic is the greatest heavyweight because he's got 3 title defenses on top of winning the title. So 4 successful title fights in a row, which is the most in UFC heavyweight history. But man, John Jones versus Cain Velasquez, that would be a barn burner of a fight. Other than that, I really don't see what he can do. John Jones versus Cain, John Jones versus Brock, John Jones versus Gustafsson. That's really all he can do right now. Any of those would be amazing fights. I'd love to see those. So that's my little spiel on UFC. That went long, man. I could talk about fights. I'll probably try to limit the fight talking because I know a lot of people probably ain't into it. But whatever, this is my podcast. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Shit, y'all.